Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at medieval architecture and education in our continuing study of a history of Christianity. We've already seen that the Middle Ages, we've divided into early, high, and late Middle Ages. In the early Middle Ages, that's when we see the barbarian invasions. The high Middle Ages, that's the time of the Crusades. The late Middle Ages, we see the formation of nation states. Architecturally, in the early Middle Ages, it's characterized by Romanesque architecture. That is a throwback to the old Rome. We're going to look at some examples in just a moment. We get to the High Middle Ages, we see the Gothic architecture, and late Middle Ages, there's still the Gothic, but now I have something new, the Renaissance architecture. Here's an example of a church in the Romanesque. Notice the building looks very solid. We have a few windows high up, the arch over the door, a small door leading into the building itself. Um, Mass and solid are the two words that come to mind, and those are words that should make you think of the old Roman Empire. By contrast, now we look at a Gothic cathedral and notice how everything is reaching up to the sky. There's a height and very steep roofs. Of course, part of this comes, and the reason why you think of it in the term of Gothic, it comes from up north where you have a heavy snowfall and you need steep roofs just to keep the roof from collapsing. But that's now moved south where that's not necessarily a need. It is now an architectural design. And then let's look at the Renaissance and notice the pillars out front, and yet it's not just a throwback to the old Roman or Greek designs. The thing that best characterizes it, it is an architecture of light where light is permitted to come in and fill the building. And of course, the word Renaissance has that whole idea of rebirth. It is, in a sense, a throwback to the old Greek and Roman styles, and yet it has been reborn with some new characteristics. There's an old medieval proverb that says a monastery without a library is like a fortress without arms. By this time in history, the monasteries had become places of learning, and this is going to help us transition to the university. Our higher education early on was through the monasteries. If you wanted to get educated, you had to go to a monastery. We had seen this especially in Ireland, but then that Irish idea of the monastery being not just a place for seclusion, not just a place for prayer, although it continued to be those things too, but also a place for education, that now has carried over to the rest of continental Europe and it has changed the way that monasteries look. From the monasteries now, we're going to move to the cathedrals, very different, but the cathedrals also are going to begin, and we saw that by edict, and where either a pope or a king might say, from now on, cathedrals are going to be places of learning. And of course, saying so didn't automatically make it so, but it has to begin with a plan, and that plan begins to carry fruit. And then from the cathedrals, it's going to be a short step to the formation of the idea of a university. The first universities at Paris and Bologna start around 1200. No physical campus. When we think of a modern day university, you think of big buildings and a big tract of land. The early universities don't have that. What's required is a place to meet. That could be almost anywhere. You need the professor and you need students. As long as you have students and teachers, now you can have the university. They would negotiate with the local towns in order to have the university there. It was considered quite a prestigious thing for a city or a town to have a university. If the university could not get a good deal with the city or town, then they could pack up and move. There's no physical campus to move. So All they have to do is go to the next town and open up classes there, and the university has just moved. Um, and so if the concessions were not granted, and this became something of a competition where a town could entice a university to come to their location. The University of Paris was run by the teachers. They would set the curriculum, and they would organize, and the university would continue from there. They had a specialty, and we're going to see specialties eventually come into vogue, where a university would be known for a certain area of study. There would be certain things that they always study, certain foundations, but then they would have a specialty. The University of Bologna, run by the students. Here their specialty was in law. The teachers were paid directly by the students. If the students didn't care for a certain professor, then soon that teacher would be out of students. He could continue teaching, but nobody would be there, and he wouldn't be getting paid. So you have the student, and whether it's organized by the faculty or not, whether it's student run or professor run, still you have the student, and he has to study a number of different areas, areas of mathematics, astronomy, music theory, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and these were considered his core classes. These were considered the areas of knowledge that were universal, hence the word university. They were to be the universal sphere of knowledge. And then from there, you could focus upon one area of study. It might be law, it might be theology. Eventually, medicine would also be an area, a specific area of study. All university students were given clerical status. That is, they were treated as though they were ordained. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be a priest, but it does mean they could only be tried by the clerical courts. You see, there were two court systems. There was the general court system for most people, and then there was the court system for the clergy. And if somebody in the clergy did something wrong, he wasn't tried by the regular court system. Didn't matter what he did, his trial is by the church court. And university students now come under that clerical court system. The penalty for striking a student was excommunication. That was very serious. That would supposedly affect your eternal salvation. Not really, but that was what the church taught. Now you can see where this would cause the university. It had the potential for being a very disruptive influence in town. If a student started a fight in a bar, and a bunch of students tore up a bar or some other place of business, they could not be tried by the local courts. They had to go to the church for the trial, and so they could get away with quite a bit of things. Students will be students, and so the church courts might look the other way and just allow students to do what they will. And so, whereas there were some cities that said we want a university, there were other places where they said enough of that. Let's let that university move to a different location. Women generally were not permitted to partake of classes in the universities, but as early as the 1200s, there were already the occasional exception to that. One of the graduates in the early 1200s from the University of Bologna was a woman. One of the professors later on in that generation was a woman. And so, generally speaking, it was male only, but there were some very notable exceptions. Now, we've moved into an area. Remember, first university begins around 1200, and that's in the middle of the scholastic age. Scholasticism is this treatment where you would study primarily theology, and you would examine a theological question from all sorts of different points of view, but you would do it by reading what the authorities had said on this theological question. whether the theological question is the problem of evil or did Adam have a navel, might be a very important area, might not seem so important to us. Um, but what we're going to jump into, beginning in the 1300s and going into the 1500s, is the advent of what is known as humanism. That is the study of other areas of human interest, science, medicine, still theology. There would be still theological studies within this realm, but it begins, instead of with the authorities, it would begin with man and his feelings, his study, his observations. So a different approach between the scholastic versus the humanistic method of study and questioning. Some of the questions that would be asked in theology would be answered in theology. The questions in the area of humanism, no resolution was necessary. And we're going to see how that plays out. The search for truth was church-based with scholasticism. With humanism, it was both nostalgic, looking back to the days of the classics, think of Plato and Aristotle. It tended to be more free. It tended to be more challenging. The focus for scholasticism was otherworldly. The focus for humanism tended to be practical and immediate.